I'll start us with a quote that my teacher often shares, and I have found it's very beautiful, very moving. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the people to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. So I wanted to talk tonight about desire for a few reasons. But I think one of the main reasons is that we're practicing in a tradition rooted in the insight tradition, in which often desire is talked about as a problem or a hindrance. And that frame I have found to be very beneficial and very helpful at times. And then in other times, I have found that it creates a kind of bind in my practice, or a place where I'm not able to fully inhabit my practice and the conditions that would most support me on my path. So I'm gonna start out, the first part of this talk is just going to be making a case for desire. Like, why is desire valuable in our practice? And yeah, sort of bringing in this flavor that comes in when we talk about yearning for the vast and endless sea. You start to get a taste of like what desire might bring to our practice, crossing the sea of suffering. Sharon Salzberg says this: in some ways, our greatest ally in this practice is our wish to be happy. This wish functions as a homing instinct for freedom when we can unite it with understanding about what actually brings us happiness. We may sometimes feel that we do not really deserve happiness, yet this wish is one of the finest things about us. So this invitation that sort of, we have this organismic intelligence that supports us in moving toward pleasure and away from pain, that we might think of mostly as a problem, but we have this wisdom, this intelligence of moving toward pleasure and away from pain. And in our insight practice, we're encouraged to marry that with wisdom about what actually leads to happiness. So investigation, bringing investigation to bear and discernment to bear, so that that homing instinct becomes more and more clear, more and more beneficial. So maybe you're hearing this in what I'm saying, but I'll say it more directly, that desire, and really like clarified or purified desire, directs us towards what we need. It's a way of discerning what we need to move towards. That ability to move toward pleasure and away from pain, it's, as I said, it's a form of intelligence in any organism, in any system that feels, anything with a body. So just like a plant will turn toward the sun, right? Or an animal will come out from hiding to get a treat. Like we're homing towards well-being. We're homing towards pleasure. And this is, we could say, the most fundamental expression of the wish to be happy. That beautiful thing about us. And it's also deeply connected with our more embodied, more feminine way of knowing. even I wrote this here and I didn't see it, but even like amoebas, right? This is a very old skill. Even amoebas, they'll like swim towards something to eat it, right? And they'll like move away from things that are uncomfortable. So we have this long history of this beautiful skill that we're bringing to bear in our practice. In the Dhammapada, it said, if by renouncing a lesser happiness, one may realize a greater happiness, let the wise being renounce the lesser, having regard for the greater. Right? So that's that skill, moving towards well-being, moving towards happiness. And I said this skill is found in any being with a body, right? So plants, animals, humans, the earth herself. And what this means also is that we really have to tend and care for and cultivate our embodiment in order to have access to this skill. Having access to the wisdom of the body requires learning to feel, to know through the body. When I think about that, I always think about Mary Oliver saying, you only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. So this like lifetime of practice that we might have to do to let the soft animal of the body be a source of knowledge and wisdom for us. And I want to, just before I close this like sort of section of the talk, I want to name, this might be something that you've experienced, and it's certainly something I've experienced, that this access to this organismic intelligence that I'm talking about, that access can become disrupted. And that actually, that fundamental skill of moving toward pleasure and away from pain, it can become disorganized. Like if we're overwhelmed, if we're navigating trauma, sometimes what starts to happen is we start to move in a disorganized way. The system is like, I'm going to move towards pain, or I'm going to move towards more chaos. And we see this in all kinds of systems. Like we can see this with climate change, for example, that the more input that's happening there, the more chaotic the system becomes. These sort of fundamental balancing principles aren't, they aren't happening in a coherent way anymore. And, a more simple example than climate change is like forgetting to eat, right? It's really basic, like moving towards the pleasure of food is a very basic human need. But when we're overwhelmed, we might lose track of that. So, how do we start to discern or purify this desire to find what I find is that the desire is sometimes it's distorted. That's the word that resonates most for me, that these beautiful desires have become distorted. And in our practice, we are refining or purifying or clarifying those distortions. And so this really brings me and brings us into this question of like, what is wholesome desire? And by wholesome, I don't mean good or bad, but like what's onward leading desire, and what type of desire isn't onward leading. So I'll just say a little bit about what I've noticed about that, and then we're going to do an exercise around that so that you can try it on for yourself. But my experience of wholesome desire is that it brings me more into the present moment. It brings me into deeper connection with myself. Often it's associated with embodiment. or brings me into a greater sense of embodiment. It supports me showing up, and it nourishes me in order to be able to do the labor that I do in the world, whether it's like caring for my heart and mind or showing up for friends, for family. Usually wholesome desire is non-addictive. It might be associated with like simple pleasures and non-addictive pleasures. It's, in general, I would say it's more bodily in my experience. So what is desire that isn't onward leading? What flavors can that have? And we usually call this craving, or tanha. That word might be familiar for you. Craving, in my experience, it's more idea-based rather than body-based. It takes me away from the moment or away from my experience. It's never sated. It like wants more and more and more. And so it also has this addictive quality and sort of an addiction loop that can happen. And often what I've noticed also is that tanha, or sort of unwholesome desire, I'm trying to move towards something that I want, but I'm not getting that. I'm getting something really different than what I want. So we could call this like, this is the distortion. Like maybe I'm watching Netflix. I can't quite get off my Netflix account. And when I check in, I notice what I'm really wanting. The wholesome desire is for rest. The system is trying to find a way to rest. But when I pay attention, I notice, oh, I actually don't feel more rested. Like I feel like sometimes I feel more and more stressed or activated, right? So you might have something like that you can resonate with, where the underlying desire is really beautiful and then it becomes distorted. So I want to invite you just to take a moment with this to sort of, you could let your eyes be open or closed, but to take a moment to see if you can remember or reflect on moments of wholesome desire, moments where you were wanting or longing for something and that it brought you into yourself, into the moment. And juxtaposing that with remembering moments where there was craving, where the desire was taking you away from yourself, away from ease. This is invitation to see if you can sense both flavors of that. Can you remember how each one felt? And what the mind was doing, how the body felt? Really letting there be awareness of the difference between these qualities. And where they lead.